Someone raises their voice nearby, not even at you, just in the same room, and your whole body goes on alert before your mind even catches up. You're completely fine 1 second, and the next your heart is pounding and you genuinely don't know why. You've been told you're sensitive. You've been told you overreact. Maybe you've started to believe it yourself, but what if your nervous system isn't overreacting at all? What if it's reacting exactly the way it was trained to? There's a term that's been spreading fast through therapy spaces and mental health content over the past few years: CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And if you grew up without a truly present father, there's a real chance this term explains more about your daily life than anything you've ever been told. Not just your relationships, your body, the way you move through rooms, the way you brace for things that haven't happened yet. Here's what almost nobody explains clearly enough. This video is going to cover the symptoms, the specific connection to father absence that most content on either topic completely skips. And one thing the mental health space online gets badly wrong about all of this that could actually be keeping you stuck. Stay through to the end, because that last part matters more than it probably sounds right now. Most people hear the word trauma and picture a single event: a car accident, an assault, something sudden and violent that you could point to on a calendar. That's what regular PTSD usually comes from: one identifiable incident with a clear before and after. CPTSD is different, and the difference matters enormously. It doesn't come from one moment. It comes from something repeated, something prolonged, something that happened over months or years, usually inside a relationship you couldn't escape, a household, a caregiver, a situation a child has no power to leave. Read that back and think about what it actually describes: years of reaching toward a father who wasn't there, or who was physically present but never emotionally available. That's not a single traumatic event you can point to on a timeline. That's exactly the prolonged, relational, inescapable pattern that CPTSD research is built around. This is why so many people who grew up with an absent or emotionally distant father never thought to look at trauma language at all. There was no incident, no single bad day, just years of something missing, which somehow felt too quiet, too ordinary, too undramatic to count as anything real. But your nervous system kept score even when your mind didn't. So let's go through what CPTSD actually looks like in practice, because the symptoms are specific, and once you hear them laid out clearly, you may recognize your own life inside them in a way that's honestly a little unsettling. The first is emotional dysregulation. This is the experience of feeling overwhelmed by emotions that seem too big for the moment that triggered them. A small comment lands like a blow. A minor disappointment spirals into something that feels unbearable for hours. From the outside, people call this overreacting. From the inside, it never feels like overreacting. It feels like drowning, every time, a little too fast to explain to anyone watching. That's the first symptom, the one that tends to hit people harder, the one that explains more than almost anything else on this list, is still ahead. Keep that in mind as we move through the rest of these. The second symptom is what clinicians call a negative self-concept, which is a formal way of describing something most people already understand from a different angle. It's the persistent feeling of worthlessness, shame, or guilt that doesn't seem to trace back to anything you actually did. If you've ever felt fundamentally not good enough in a way that no achievement or reassurance ever quite touches, this is where that lives. A child who grows up without a present father often arrives at one quiet, devastating conclusion: I must not be worth staying for. That belief doesn't stay contained to childhood. It becomes the lens through which everything else gets filtered. And what clinicians call negative self-concept is simply that lens, fully grown, still running in the background of your adult life, usually without you even noticing it's there. The third symptom is relationship difficulty, and it doesn't look like one consistent pattern. Sometimes it's difficulty trusting people even when they've given you no real reason not to. Sometimes it's a fear of abandonment that makes you hold on too tightly, and sometimes it's the opposite, pushing people away the moment they get close enough that losing them would actually hurt. Both of those patterns come from the same root: A nervous system that learned a long time ago that closeness is not something you can fully trust. The fourth is hypervigilance. Your nervous system's stuck in constant alert, scanning for danger even when there isn't any. The racing heart when a voice gets slightly louder. The tension in a room that's perfectly quiet. The inability to actually relax even when nothing is wrong. People with hypervigilance usually just call themselves anxious or wired that way or a worrier. But hypervigilance isn't a personality trait. It's a survival skill your body built when staying alert actually mattered, and it never got the message that the threat eventually passed. And the fifth, the one that explains more than any other symptom on this list, the one worth waiting for, is dissociation. A disconnection from your own emotions, your body, sometimes even your sense of what's real, especially under stress. Some people describe it as watching their life from slightly outside it. Others describe it as going numb in moments that should feel like something. It's often misread from the outside as indifference, when it's actually the opposite. It's a nervous system protecting itself by going quiet when things become too much to feel directly. If you've ever sat in a room full of people who love you and still felt like you were watching the moment from somewhere else entirely, this is what that was. Now here's the part that ties all of this back to the father wound specifically, and it's the part most content on either topic skips entirely. Most discussions of CPTSD focus on obviously dramatic causes: abuse, violence, severe neglect. And most discussions of father absence focus on the emotional and relational consequences without ever using clinical trauma language at all. The two conversations rarely meet, which means a lot of people fall into this strange gap where their experience wasn't dramatic enough to feel like trauma, but it was prolonged and relational enough to actually create the exact nervous system patterns that CPTSD describes. If that's you, you've probably spent years minimizing what happened, telling yourself it wasn't that bad, other people had it worse. He didn't hurt me, he just wasn't there. But the nervous system doesn't grade trauma on a scale of how dramatic it looked from the outside. It responds to what was actually missing, consistently, over years, during the exact window when a child's sense of safety and self-worth was still being built. Here's an honest caveat, because this topic deserves real intellectual honesty rather than oversimplification. CPTSD is recognized as a diagnosis in some major clinical frameworks, including the ICD-11, which is the system used internationally. But it is not currently a standalone diagnosis in the DSM-5, the manual most commonly used in the United States, where many of its symptoms get folded into discussions of PTSD or related conditions instead. This is a genuinely debated area among clinicians and researchers, not a settled fact. Any source that tells you otherwise without that nuance is leaving something important out. What this means practically is straightforward. You don't need a formal diagnosis sitting in a chart somewhere for these patterns to be real and worth understanding. The symptoms, the lived experience, the nervous system response, all of that exists and matters whether or not it's been given an official label by any particular manual. For anyone who wants to go deeper on the research behind this, the specific symptoms, and how the father wound connects to each one, there's a full article and resource list linked below this video. Worth bookmarking if this is something you're actively working through, because this is a topic where more context genuinely changes how you understand your own patterns. But here's where the last few minutes of this video matter most, because this is the part that most mental health content online gets badly wrong, and it's worth naming directly. Across mental health spaces right now, attachment styles and trauma responses are often presented as fixed identities. You're anxious attachment, you're avoidant, you have CPTSD full stop, as if it's a permanent category you now belong to forever. And that framing isn't just inaccurate. It's quietly harmful because it can leave people feeling more stuck rather than less, more defined by what happened to them rather than actually empowered to do something about it. CPTSD is not who you are. It's what happened to you. Those are not the same sentence, even though they get treated like they are constantly online. What happened to you shaped a set of patterns in your nervous system, patterns that developed for real reasons, in real circumstances, often because they were the smartest possible response to an environment that genuinely required vigilance or self-protection or emotional shutdown just to get through. But patterns that were built can also be changed, slowly, imperfectly, not by erasing what happened, because that part is permanent and doesn't need to be undone. It only needs to be understood differently than it currently is. And this is the thing almost nobody says clearly enough about healing from this. It's not about achieving some final state where none of these symptoms ever appear again. It's smaller and more honest than that. It's noticing hypervigilance in your body and recognizing it for what it is, a learned response, rather than treating it as a fact about the present moment. It's catching the negative self-concept mid-sentence, that automatic thought that you're not enough, and asking where that thought actually came from instead of just accepting it as true. It's staying in a hard conversation instead of dissociating out of it, even just once, even just for a few more seconds than you managed last time. None of this requires a diagnosis. It doesn't require an official label or a clinician's confirmation that what you experienced counts. It only requires the willingness to look honestly at a nervous system that has been working exactly as designed, responding to an absence that was real, even if nobody around you ever called it that. So let's come back to where we started. That moment when someone's voice gets slightly louder and your whole body responds before your mind even knows what's happening. You've been told that's oversensitivity. You've been told that's a character flaw. But what you now know is that it's a nervous system doing exactly what it learned to do in exactly the environment it was shaped by. You weren't overreacting all those years. Your body was remembering something your mind never had the words for. And now, finally, you do. The full article with resources is linked below. And if you know someone who's been carrying this without ever having language for it, this might be worth sending their way.